Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day we explore uncharted digital waters, bust myths, and share stories of how technology is transforming our lives, work, industries, and world. And in doing so, on this journey together, we've created somewhat of a nice problem. Let me give you a sneak peek behind the curtain and just tell you that I went daily with this podcast a couple of years ago after getting inundated with requests to come on. I don't like saying no. I say yes far too often. And I typically record 10 episodes a week. So 10 interviews a week I book in to cover me from cancellations, or if I get sick or go on holiday or have a trip somewhere. So that's why I record 10 a week. So despite that, I currently have 20 interviews edited, in the bag, ready to go, all scheduled. And as I record this interview in August, I have 60 interviews booked in until October. And I do wish I could say yes to every pitch that comes my way, but I might have to halt bookings for the next few weeks. Otherwise, I'll be heading straight into podcast burnout. But it is a nice problem to have, and the show must go on. I just wanted to apologise to anyone out there that has asked to come on, and I may have had to delay it for a little bit longer than usual, but we will get down that waiting list and keep those interesting guests coming, because the reason I started this show was to get your voice and share it out there, and maybe we can all learn from each other's experiences in technology. And today's guest is Josh Feast, and he's the CEO of a company called Cogito. And he's going to take a deep dive into how the human-AI relationship and how it will define the future of work, and maybe explore how we can extend ourselves with AI and teach AI to understand us better, and how to create human AI interactions that work in the moment. We have a lot to get through in a short amount of time, so buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Boston so we can speak with Josh Feast, CEO of Cogito. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Josh. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure can, Neil. Great to be here. So my name's Joshua Feast. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cogito, which is an AI company based in Boston. And we do what we call an AI coach for the empathic enterprise.
Fantastic. And before I learn more about Cogito, one thing that really interests me is, what about your origin story? I'm curious, where did your passion for technology come from, and what was it that put you on the path you're on today? Can you remember what lit that spark?
Yeah, I certainly can. The original background, so I grew up in New Zealand. I was interested in entrepreneurship and technology from a pretty young age. And at a certain point, I decided I really wanted to put my energy into trying to bring something new into the world that I thought might not have existed if I didn't help it along. My the reason I got involved in this particular area is I had some early work experience in technology, but I was working for some large health and human services organizations, actually New Zealand's largest employer of social workers. And I just saw that these most wonderful, caring people in the world burning out, the bureaucracy, some of the challenges of stressed populations. And I just thought, if there's got to be a better way. Is there a way to organize better for people that work in these types of roles so that they have a better work experience, and the people they serve have a better experience? So that was my motivation to get started on the track.
Love that. And of course, that path led you to becoming the CEO and co-founder of an AI company called Cogito. So a great name, by the way. But can you tell me more about the company and your more human approach to AI that you've taken here?
Yeah, I can, absolutely. So we're an MIT spin out. So at our origin, we were about 10 years of basic science, looking at how you can teach a computer to read human behavior in a psychological state. And then from there, we've really sort of devoted ourselves to these two concepts. So the first is AI coaching, which is the idea that if you can have a human in the workplace and pair them with an AI, you can help that human be more successful at their roles and at serving customers. And the second is this idea that as an organization scales on the basis of data and process and software, it loses its humanness and it doesn't really recognize the variability between people or what people need in the moment. So the second concept is, how can you bring human data to organizations to just create a better place to work?
Love that. And I've got to ask, the name, is there a story there too?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in some ways a sort of a logical name for an AI company. So Cogito comes from Descartes, Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. So that's I think in Latin. We originally started it because we were thinking about what we would do with it, and now it turns out to be a useful name for a system that in some sense thinks and feels.
What a wonderful moment of serendipity there. Can I also ask then that you tell me a little bit more about your belief that the human-AI relationship will actually define the future of work and how we can actually extend ourselves with AI, because it's all about complementing human skills rather than competing with them, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. It's certainly an area I feel very passionate about. We can all sort of make statements to organize the complexity of the world, but I would say that I think that right now what we're seeing is a lot of interest in individuality and recognizing the variability between people and not treating people as all the same. And then I think so that leads me to believe that the sort of next way we're going to succeed is by sort of getting value from that individuality and variability. So for me, that's the big thing. I think we see that across the board right now. And so my view is that we've sort of got as far as we can with kind of standardization and standard tools. Like when I look at workplace software, for example, I like to say there's a basic assumption built into all of it today that all the humans are the same all the time. Right? And I think we need more precision. And so I think that one of the great opportunities is to have AI working in tandem with humans in a way that can support and extend our strengths and avoid our weaknesses. But I would just want to hesitate. I don't necessarily view that as something that's like pervasive, like you always have your AI with you everywhere you go. I think it's much more that when you want to engage in certain types of tasks or roles, then the AI can be there to assist you. Kind of like, if you kind of the metaphor I like to use is lane assist in a car, right? You need it when you're driving your car. You sometimes don't need it because you're going along perfectly fine. But if you're stressed or tired or distracted, it can, save your life, right? So that's the equivalent to what I have in mind.
And whenever we talk about artificial intelligence, especially when the media talks about it, gets people feeling a little bit nervous. It's usually because worst case scenarios are reported as fact, but that is an argument for another day. But I'm curious, do you think AI needs to be regulated more and better? And ultimately, if it does, by whom and how?
Yeah, so I think AI is a simple way to think about AI is it's programming using data. So you could, in theory, get the same outcomes by writing down a bunch of rules, but it's much more efficient to build your software by just showing it a bunch of data and saying, do what that data says. And that's kind of like a simple way to think about AI. So in that context, I think it's maybe not so much the AI that needs to be regulated, and is actually the data the underlying data that's used to create that AI in the first place. And so I think absolutely data needs regulation. There is also very good regulation. I think that it needs regulation on one hand to protect human data. So these are privacy and other types of things. But I think we also have to regulate or provide a way to provide data access. Because otherwise you end up with these big pools of inaccessible data that essentially create sort of data monopolies. And so I think that's something that you can't really avoid unless you have a sort of a broader, organization that's providing that oversight. So that sort of implies some sort of governmental or cross-border organization to make sure that doesn't happen.
And what frameworks do you think need to be put in place just to ensure the development and implementation of ethical AI? Because there's so many positives around AI that we don't get to talk about and celebrate enough.
Yeah, so the table stakes for frameworks in ethical AI is bias, of reducing bias. So I like to say you don't have an AI company unless you care a lot about reducing bias and making sure bias isn't in your AI. Like we've done foundational published research and looking at speech and emotion and reduction of gender bias. That's a big thing that we've done and led the way on and published. So I think that's kind of table stakes. So that's an important part of the framework. And the second, I think, is data access. And the data access is tied to, I think, a really important concept, which is who gets to develop AI, because AI is a set of techniques. And so one of the most critical things is what problems do we decide to solve with it? And if a very narrow segment of the population are the only ones who get to develop AI, then the range of problems that they try to solve will also be very narrow. So I think that the highest leverage sort of framework is to create a situation where lots of people that are using AI to solve lots of different problems for a broader set of constituents and communities.
And I'm curious, are you concerned that AI robots and all those nasty headlines that we see will replace people in the call center in jobs in general? Or do you actually think they will work seamlessly alongside human workers and actually complement their skills rather than replace them?
Yeah, a great question. I probably didn't maybe clarify for everybody that our product, our AI coach today, one of its big applications is to help and support call center workers. So what it does is it listens to calls, measures how well they're doing, and then supports people, guides them, helps them with difficult conversations. So I happen to know quite a bit about call centers in particular for that reason. So I think that I sort of think about it this way. So there's a continuous investment that has happened forever and will continue to happen in creating self-service tools. And that's good. Like that started from when we used to mail people catalogs. And so that should always happen. However, and particularly when you think about call centers, that's important because a call center call is really expensive. So a call might cost a company $7 or $8. So that's like a lot of, think about how many calls happen. Think about, that could be 20 to 30% of operating costs for some companies. But although there should always be an effort to try and, not spend too much of that money from an efficiency perspective, there's this basic fundamental need for humans to talk to other people. Like humans just want to talk to other humans. There's some very important reasons why that's true. And so what you see is that certainly call center roles, they just increase with GDP, and they have for a very long time. So I also think in another sort of very promising thread is much more in the realm of human augmentation, which is really much more, in the case of call centers, about making the interactions more effective and satisfying for all concerned. And I think that's a really maybe under-recognized and really important application of AI, which is let's help the humans in those roles rather than try to replace them.
And I do think we've both seen all those headlines in the media with the robots with the red eyes and all those scary stories. So one of the things I try and do on this podcast every day is smash a few misconceptions out there that people might have. So I'm curious, is there any misconceptions that you see constantly around AI or AI-supported empathy that you could share or maybe lay to rest today once and for all?
Yeah, I mean, I think so there's sort of underestimation and overestimation of the capabilities of AI. So I think that probably one of the misconceptions, which is maybe an overestimation of AI's capabilities, is the sense that it's really on a track to have like a real model of the world and therefore be something you can actually have a proper conversation about. Like that, we're just very, very, very far away from that future. Right now we can supply some data for some, specific use cases and then sort of use that data to create some automation. But it's very different from my understanding, that you're in England and what that means and what it might be like to host a podcast or, I don't know, but having that sense of like understanding you is very far away from what an AI really is capable of. On the other hand, I think we underestimate its potential to help with the human condition in certain senses. So, AI really can be used to what we call read social signals. So basically, look at behavior, infer what's going on or what's probably going on, understanding maybe how people are feeling or how well they're relating to each other. And therefore it can help us ourselves relate to each other better and understand ourselves better. So it can be a real partner and coach us and assist us. But that's not exactly the same as being us.
Love that. And what excites you about the future of AI? You're working right in the heart of all this. You must see a lot of exciting technologies, see the emerging trends. So what excites you about the future and the kind of role that you guys are going to play in that too?
Well, I think for me, the most exciting and important thing about AI is its potential to help our society move forward. So no surprise to anybody here, there's a lot of complexity and interconnectedness and uncertainty right now. And, we as humans, we change and evolve at the pace of biological evolution, which is way slower than our society moves. And so I think that ultimately tools like AI can help us improve the things that we really want to fix in our society, because most of these are problems of massive complexity, and have wonderful, rewarding lives, rather than sort of being overwhelmed and miserable in sort of this, modern, complex age that we live in.
Perfect. And the question I always like to ask my guests is, we started today's conversation, of course, talking about your origin story. What put you on this path? Now I'm going to ask you, what was the soundtrack to your journey in technology in your career? Is there a song that has accompanied you throughout your career, or just helps you get your head in the zone before going on stage, or even landing a big meeting? Is there any song that means anything to you that we can add to our Spotify playlist?
It's a great question. I'll share the first song I ever liked, which caused me to buy my first cassette, and I'm dating myself when I say cassette. It was "She Talks to Angels" by the Black Crowes. And I think I was pretty young when I first heard it, but I think I kind of liked the emotional, angsty part of it. And I work in the world of emotional intelligence, so I quite like that part.
And they were quite a band, weren't they, man? I'm dating myself here, but they rocked it back in the day. Remember it well. Remedy was, I think, one of my favourites back in the day.
Exactly.
And for anyone listening that would like to find out more information about Cogito, the work you're doing, and how they can contact your team, etc., where's the best starting point for that?
Yeah, I would say our website has lots of really good information. That's at cogitocorp.com, cogitocorp.com. And
I do urge people to check you out. I love how you're exploring how we can extend ourselves with AI and ultimately teach AI to understand us better too, and to create a human AI interaction that works in the moment. And more than anything, though, thank you for coming on, sharing your story, the story behind the company. And hopefully we can do it again in the future. But thanks for joining me today, Josh.
My pleasure. Wonderful to chat, Neil.
So a big thank you to Josh for coming on today. And like I said in the interview, if we take a deep step back from those scary headlines that we've all seen, those robots with the big red eyes, the big questions are not actually centered around fear. It's actually things like, how can we extend ourselves with AI? Almost make ourselves limitless. And how can we teach AI to understand us better? And how can we better create human-AI interactions that work in the moment? There's a lot to think about there, and I point the microphone back in your direction now and ask you to share your insights, experiences, opinions for AI, against AI, anything at all. If you want to come on the show, even though I said don't book any more interviews in, send me an email anyway. I'm sure we can work something out. But I've taken up far too much of your time already. So I will speak with you all bright and early tomorrow. But I don't just say this, I genuinely mean it. A big thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in each day. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.